Welcome to
Gallcast.
Gaulish Polytheist Podcast. Welcome back. I loved all the positive feedback I got from the first episode. It's very, very encouraging. I'm psyched to keep doing more of these now. I'm also very excited to announce my new co-host. They were very generous to offer their time to do this, and I couldn't be happier to have them aboard. Welcome to Bran O'Gara.
Hi. You said
How's it
you
going?
didn't. It's going all right. I am currently painting my nails while we do this.
Awesome.
All right.
Fantastic. Multitasking.
Got to be good at it. What can I say?
So, well, let's start off with just talk a little bit about yourself at first while I sip some wine.
Okay. Well, my name is Bran O'Gara. That is Gaulish for a raven's cry. I have been a Gaulish polytheist for not terribly long. Actually, I just found this path in April. But I have been a polytheist for a little over 20 years now. Mostly kind of just sticking to a generic Celtic path that dipped pretty heavily into the Gaelic side of things until I stumbled across Gallchat and TG in, I think it was April, might have been March. I can't remember. This year's been sort of a blur.
Yeah, it's been very chaotic for sure.
Definitely. And found I fit here pretty happily, and that most of my deities are, in fact, Gaulish deities, which I was super not aware of at the time. And so here I am.
Yeah, I remember when you first came into Gallchat and the Tau of Galation, which is, I don't think I explained it in the first episode, but it's a Gaulish polytheist organization. Yeah, you were really psyched and you were really eager to get through the test and become a member. I remember that very vividly. And yeah, I think it was about April or so.
Yeah, Aprilish. Yeah, it sort of when I found it, went searching for it because I was having a recurring dream about a deity waiting on me, and it was not one I was familiar with, and was certainly not one I was already working with. So I went to the Koru priesthood server first, and then they directed me out here to Gallchat, and I was like, here's the thing. And I got like 30 answers, and it was a lot, but that's okay. It was what I needed.
That's awesome. So I didn't know that. I knew you were a polytheist for quite a while. But yeah, I didn't know it was 20 years.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's because nobody realizes that I'm literally older than everyone else.
I know. When people realize I'm like 31, 32, they don't think that I'm that old.
Yeah. I am approaching 40 next year. Next year I turn 40.
Oh wow.
Yeah. I'm an old lady.
Well, something you said earlier that I kind of made me thinking of something we can chat about real quick was the Gaulish name. What made you decide crying Raven?
It's Raven's Cry. Originally we were looking at my name is Bee, like Bumblebee. And so originally we were looking at Bee, but the Gaulish word for Bee is in fact the same name as my sister. And since I get called that enough as a child, I didn't want to do that as an adult also. So I was trying to think of what is something that can describe me, but also kind of honor my deities. And my primary patroness is the Morrigan, and Cathu Bodva, who is the Gaulish battle raven, goddess of war. And A Raven's Cry came about because I was in the server and I joked that I needed to figure out how to say loud angry bird because, well, like most military veterans, I have an anger issue. Uh, and so this is how that came about. So Branagara translates to a raven's cry, because if anybody's ever heard a raven let out a loud cry, it is quite loud and quite distinct.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
and then my surname is Morimagi, which is a sea field, partially because I love the ocean, and partially because my last name in English roughly means like a moor or a bog or a marsh, and there's no word for sea marsh, so the closest we could get was sea field.
Mhm. Yeah, I remember
Um,
Nellos, and I think someone else was helping you work on that for a while.
I want to say it was Nellos and oh gosh, I don't even remember. That was in like April or May, and I've
Yeah.
slept since then.
Well, real quick, Artocatos means war bear or battle bear, and I chose that because I wanted to honor my military past as well, and the fact that I've just always been very drawn to and very close to bears, and my one of my main deities is Artio, so battle bears, war bears seem to fit very well with me. But just to kind of, mean, I love the Gaulish names, and that was something really cool when I first got into Gaulish polytheism. And I don't think it's necessarily anything we have to do. It's just something that we like to do to kind of, um, I
I
guess in a
think it
way,
helps us feel more connected, I think.
yeah, absolutely, yeah. For me, it felt more connection to the ancestors in a way, you know.
Yeah, that in itself is something that's new for me at all, is working with ancestors. So we should cover that at some point. Maybe
Absolutely,
not this
absolutely.
episode, but at some point.
No, oh, phew, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have a whole section of my altar devoted just to the ancestors. But yeah, that's definitely something we'll have to cover at a later date. So, what you said you were more of a like a generic, I don't maybe not generic, but kind of just like a rough Celtic pagan, for a while up until you found out, discovered Gaulish polytheism.
Yeah, I started out in the well, what brought me was, the disillusionment of Christianity in the first place at the ripe old age of 18. And then I moved. I had a friend who was a high priestess of a coven, and she started talking to me about paganism and polytheism and all of that. And she follows the Egyptian deities, and she has been dedicated to them for quite a long time. And mythology always I found incredibly fascinating. So
Mhm.
I started looking into that, and I connected with Anubis and Bastet and Sekhmet. And there's always been a kind of a battle theme or a death theme in all of my years of being a polytheist, and that's largely, I think, because I was in the military as well. Um, and
Oh yeah.
we talked about it, and I started working first with those three, and then they sort of just uh, guided me along until I switched from that to the Norse pantheon, trying to figure out where I fit, and Egyptian definitely wasn't it. So Kemetic definitely wasn't it. I'm very not Kemetic. Uh, Yeah. And so I started looking at the Norse pantheon, and I worked with them for maybe like a year. But they just sort of did the same thing, where they just sort of guided me along until I found where I fit, which was with the Morrigan. Um, and I've been with her for probably a little over 15, 16 years, somewhere around there. And I just I say generically Celtic because it was generically Celtic. I didn't have a ton of information. I didn't have access to, a large amount of history. Unlike a lot of younger polytheists, everything for me was actual books. And so we didn't have the huge range of availability that the internet gave us. It was still pretty like my usability for it wasn't great. And so I had to try and figure it out on my own, and just kind of went based off of my own personal gnosis and interactions with others who, I mean, definitely followed different pantheons. I didn't get exposed to another Celtic practitioner until I was probably 20, 25, somewhere around there. And so it just was very generically Celtic. I knew a little bit here and there. I was able to pick up a book here and there, but I was definitely a Wiccan flavored Celtic, which is fine. I am a practicing witch. I'm just not Wiccan anymore. I haven't been Wiccan in
No
a
judgment
long
here.
time. A lot of us start off in Wicca. It's available. It's readily there. It's very easy to find basic information on Wicca. And so Wicca is where I started because I was also practicing witchcraft. And with Wicca, witchcraft is intrinsically tied into it, and they're not really something you can separate. So once I left Wicca, which honestly I was practicing Wicca for maybe like 5 or so years, so I think I've not been practicing for 10, 15 years, something like that. I don't know. It's been a long time.
Yeah.
It's been a hot minute. And so I switched over to just kind of I separated out my witchcraft practice from my religion. And my witchcraft is very secular, comparatively to a lot of other people. And my focus on my religion was mostly just me trying to hide from the Morrigan when I 100% shouldn't have been. And she doesn't handle it well. So it just kind of grew from there, and I followed the Morrigan, and then Cernunnos came in. Not long after the Morrigan, Cernunnos came in because I am gender fluid, though I did not know it at the time. I did not acknowledge it at the time. And so I needed that balance of the masculine to offset the feminine. And then from there, it added in Katu Bodwa. She just arrived, announced herself effectively, and then just settled in for the long haul. And that's been about 8 years. So my generic Celtic grew to a more Gael flavor probably like 10 years ago. It started taking on a more Gaelic aspect, and that's largely because information became more readily available. The internet was far more helpful than it was before. Things like that. So it was easier to get the basic needs met of being able to find basic information, and so that's why it was heavily Gael. And then Gael led me here, and I got dumped a ton of information dumped in my lap inside of like 3 days. Worked out who the deity was, and that was Camulus, and just kind of went from there. And the last 6 months has just been me trying to stuff information in my head, like trying to put straw in a pillowcase. And trying to adapt my faith and how I interact and what I do to accommodate and fall more in line with the Gaulish view of things, which has been very good for me, has made me far more active. And while it is incorporating a lot more Gaulish than Gael, the Gael is still there because the Morrigan is a Gaelic god. And so everything I do with her is very Gael, and then everything I do with everybody else who is Gaulish is very Gaulish, and it makes it a little interesting when you're trying to balance that out, because those are some pretty drastically different between the continental Celts and the insular Celts.
Oh yeah.
Viewpoints are a wee bit different.
It's
so
just a little often.
It is. So sometimes it's a little weird. Like my daily devotions have shifted to a Gaulish feel and more of a Gaulish flavor and more of a Gaulish style, which has been kind of interesting because even with my daily devotions to the Morrigan, they are more Gaulish now than they are Gael. But she doesn't seem to mind, so I'll take it.
It's funny you say that because in a way, like kind of a weird story, but right before I became a polytheist, I was playing a game called Smite, and in Smite, the Morrigan is a playable character, and I just remember
I know. I've seen the imagery.
Yeah, I remember just I love that character, and she's really difficult to play as, but it in a weird way it did kind of it was a kind of a stepping stone into becoming a polytheist because from there I from playing that game I wanted to read more about this deity and I started getting more into mythology again. I've always been obsessed with mythology since I was in like fourth grade or so, and then
It was
that led.
Egypt. Egypt did it for me because when I was a kid, Egypt was fascinating, just
Oh yeah,
fascinating for me.
yeah. I mean, yeah, we did it. I think third grade or so is when we learned about Egypt. Um, but yeah, just like I was, I was adult. This was, I was like 20, 29, 30 ish. And yeah, just like I started diving into books, I started looking online, and eventually I ran into Artio and Cernunnos, who really helped me along. So it was like the Morrigan was very much a stepping stone, in a way, through a video game. But like you, I also worship some Norse deities, mainly just Tyr and sometimes Freyr and Odin, but mainly Tyr but yeah, even when I do little daily offerings to them, it is in more of a Gaulish fashion, and they don't, as far as I can tell, they don't really seem to mind.
I think it's more that, it happens at all, that it's sort of just it's done, they're respected, they're
They're
revered.
being honored.
Yeah, because I still keep I keep a family altar that is because my whole house is very different. Because I'm Gaulish polytheist. My partner is a heathen with a Gaelic deity that offsets. He follows Odin and then also Kaliak, which I know I'm butchering the pronunciation of. Um, but I can't pronounce anything correctly because American. And
Oh yeah.
then my stepkid, they are uh, Hellenic.
Oh.
And so our family altar is just sort of where like it's a loose array of the deities that are honored in this house but aren't necessarily directly worshipped. So like I've got Frey and Freya up there, and I've got Bast and Anubis and Sekhmet and um, Apollo, and it's just this weird array all on one altar. And they when I do my daily devotions, I go through and I do my deities, and then I go and I give them offerings as well, and a little quick devotion. But it's just a very strange house.
Yeah, I mean, I got my one altar in the house. I kind of everyone's free to use. My fiance is kind of agnostic. She still has some Christian views, but not in a bad way or anything like that. But she's very interested. She's very supportive of what I do and what I worship and what I practice. That she's had dreams of ravens before, so she's very fascinated with deities like Nanta Swelta and not so much Katu Bodua because she doesn't
She's
like the violent
intimidating.
act.
If she's
She,
intimidating.
she does, yeah, a little intimidating. The Morrigan kind of scares her a little bit, but she is still fascinated with ravens. So someone mentioned Nanta Swelta to her, and she's been kind of interested there. My kids are, they just are what they are. My 10-year-old says that he wants to be a polytheist as well, but he's not very practicing. He's a 10-year-old boy, so it's
He's 10.
yeah. So like the only ones he knows about are like Mars and Thor's, all the the big masculine ones.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, that's also pop culture exposure largely too.
Oh yeah, that's my 6-year-old. He like the only thing he knows about Thor is what he's seen in the movies.
I mean, and who wouldn't like that?
Oh yeah, yeah.
It's ideal.
Well, stick around when we come back. We'll be talking with Nelson about the Caligny calendar and the holidays. See you soon. Welcome back. We are here with the one and only Nellos. Just introduce yourself, buddy, and we'll get right on to it.
I'm Nelos, Letinelos Torbogenos. I'm one of the founders of Bestis No Galatian, that is BNG, and I'm also a member of Toto Galatian, TG. I'm from Ohio, and I've been in Gaulish Custom for 2.5 years, I believe. And I live with my wife and a frequent guest on many voice chats done in the community.
Right on. So, why don't just before we get into the Caligny calendar, why don't you explain the holiday that was today?
Kentagiamos. That is Gaulish for the start of winter, and it occurs normally around 2 first quarter moons before the winter solstice. It is mainly a holiday that is about giving reverence to one's ancestors, be they of blood or of culture or of inspiration. This is common with people that are involved in political movements, for example.
You said it's one that's common with people involved in political movements. I know this is a little bit of a digression, but I'm kind of curious how.
No, I mean the concept of ancestors being venerated in the purview of activism.
Okay, gotcha.
Right. So, like, often people in various civil rights movements, folks that are in certain customs, I guess we might call them polytheistic customs, will often venerate people who are influential to a given movement that they're in.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah, so the main part of Kentagiamos is, of course, veneration of ancestors. And particularly in B&G, one of the things that we employ in regards to that is the worship of Ogmios. And so Ogmios becomes one of the other main focus of Kentagiamos. And the reason for that is that there are instances in the lore where they mention Heracles. And during the time in which the people we know of as the Gauls were in contact with the Greeks, one of the things about Greek lore that they seemed to enjoy was the lore of Heracles. However, rarely in Gaul was it ever as simple, it seems, as just taking a deity at face value. So what they would often do is basically Gallicize it. So it's not so much that they were in particular worshiping Heracles, but that the way they would have perceived a deity took on a form of its own. So in regards to that, one of the ways in which Gauls had done this was through their god Ogmios. So whether Ogmios emerges from the knowledge of Heracles, or whether Ogmios was already a deity and Herculean lore was added to his mythological and cultural existence, we don't really know.
And we'll definitely cover Ogmios in a later episode. But just to clarify, because I know in various Discord servers, a common question is Ogmios in any way related to Gaelic Ogma?
The thing about that is that generally not willing to say anything like that, mainly in the sense that, like, there might be a linguistic connection there, but the way deities were engaged with are very uniquely a product of cultures they come from. And sometimes a deity crosses those borders, and when they do, that relationship is totally different. And so when that relationship changes, in a sense, we're looking at a new deity. Because it isn't just the being, but it's also the way the being is related to. So yeah, looking at Irish Ogma and Gaulish Ogmios, yeah, I mean, I'd still say they're two very different beings. But there could, there's a possible linguistic relation there. I'm not very well versed in Irish linguistics, but it seems, that seems like it makes sense. But yeah, the way they're related upon is a product of their given cultures. So Ogma, regardless of whether or not he's related to Ogmios, is very much, that relation is very much a product of, Irish culture at the time. And as it is with Ogmios and the Gauls. So that's generally the way I tend to look at that.
Right on, right on. Now, unfortunately, I wasn't really able to partake in the festivities today. What exactly did we all do to celebrate this holiday?
To answer that question, it comes in two parts. The first part being that I suppose we might call it the more ritualistic aspect of it. So we did two rituals today. The first one was to the ancestors, the Roganessia, and the second to Ogmios, of course. So those are who we do our rituals to. Otherwise, you have the things that one may just do, various activities that one might enjoy on a holiday. And so for Kentiamos, one of the things I enjoy doing is I like having some cider because we're talking about, what would traditionally have been around the end of the harvest season. So, something like apples they would have had access to. And, so things involving apples tend to be very important. I mean, this is, the beginning of winter. So, we're talking about, the changes in the, outside, with, the changing colors of the leaves, autumn, I suppose. Because the Gauls generally interpret there being two seasons. So, what people today may think of as autumn kind of gets divided in that, as the end of summer, beginning of winter. So for me, mainly apples. We enjoy, various sweets and confections. We tend to have we have a good meal, which pretty much any Gaulish holiday would have a good meal with it. So specifically, we enjoy beef dishes. At least I do. That's something we do in our home, in our Tegos. And otherwise, I would say this is an excellent time for divinations because we're at a thin state as far as this is a time in a lot of Indo-European cultures where there's this, I put it, liminal space. So it's not uncommon to see, things like spirits being associated with this time of year, or their ability to enter our world.
Okay. We had pumpkin pie and apple cider in our house.
Yeah, I'm actually enjoying a cup of cider right now. Yeah, mainly. So yeah, I'd say the activities for this time of year, divination's a great one because, you have certainly spirits afoot this time of year. So that's a big one, I think, is divination. And then otherwise, I would say enjoying the fruits and products of the season. So of course that'll be different depending on where someone lives. Here, it's definitely pumpkin and apple related things. Obviously, it didn't have pumpkins in Gaul. But for folks that are looking to localize, like in this part of the United States, especially like in Ohio, we have no shortage of pumpkin patches. And pumpkin pie is a favorite this time of year, as it is in a lot of other places as well. So really, yeah, those to me are the bigger takeaways for this time of year. I think that other than the association with ancestors, I think it's because this is a time we kind of look inward. And we tend to move back to, at least in our sphere of activities, tend to start moving more towards back inside. So I think it's natural and normal that as we enter a time, especially back then, which would have been a time of great uncertainty, winter would, that, we would look to people that had survived many other ones in the past for guidance. Obviously in a world with our infrastructure now where, most people have access to who live in cold weather climates to heating and such, so it's much less dangerous. But carry on, that spirit and, that sense of tradition, I think is very important. So I'd say, looking to the ancestors for guidance makes sense. And for Ogmios, and to bring back to the point of, likening him to Heracles, is that, one of the important things about him in that regard was that, he was said to be an ancestor of the Gauls. They said that was the ancestor of the Gauls. And so in a custom like B&G, for example, we definitely took up that. We took up on that quite a bit. All right, the last thing on Ogmios that I'd like to offer in relation to his position as ancestor, and one of the reasons why Bessus Galatian picked Ogmios in that sense, so to speak, was something that Ralph Hausler said in his treatise called From Tomb to Temple, The Role of Hero Cults in Local Religion in Gaul and Britain During the Iron Age and Roman Period. It's quite a lengthy title, in my opinion, but hey. What he said about Ogmios was this. He said, indigenous deities like Ogmios appear to be heroes par excellence, comparable to Heracles, whose heroic deeds were already known in pre-Roman Gaul. In this view, it should not surprise us that Parthenius of Nicaea considered Hercules to be ancestor of all Gauls, and that Ogmios could be seen as the god from whom all life originates. Yes, so this we found rather poignant, and in the search and navigating the debates about who like the deity is that is like the ancestor of the Gauls. Yeah, this is how we landed on Ogmios. So we have a deity who is likened to Heracles, and although it should be said he is not the only one that was, Smertrios comes to mind as well. Smertrios was found on the Pillar of the Boatmen in Paris, actually. I believe under Notre Dame. But anyway, that's how we landed on Ogmios. So, since Parthenius of Nicaea claimed that the Hercules was the ancestor of all Gauls, or Heracles, and Ogmios was quite clearly likened to him. There was actually, it was in a satire written by Lucian of Samosata, where he talks to a Gaulish man about a mural he sees. And in this mural, he sees this, old man with deep suntan skin, with chains hanging out of his mouth, to the ears of a band of listeners, it seems, a band of followers. And, Lucian was disgusted to see, Heracles depicted in this way. As he said that he had all of the other Herculean attributes, such as, he had the bow, the club, and the pelt of the Nemean lion. And, the Gaul, in essence, said to him that the way we see him, we see the greatest strength as eloquence. So it was befitting to us that a god who showed great strength, that his greatest strength would be in his speech and his eloquence. That because eloquence could bind people to your will better than strength could. And that eloquence reaches perfection in old age. And that's why Ogmios was depicted as old. But anyway, seeing as he had all of these traits that the Gauls admired and how he was likened to Heracles in the first place, and, with the claim that, he was the ancestor of all Gauls, it made sense, that would be Ogmios.
Right on. That's awesome. So I know a lot of these holidays are reconstructed based on the Coligny calendar. What is the Coligny calendar and where did it come from?
The Coligny calendar, was it was a bronze calendar that was found in Coligny in eastern France, in the territory of the nation that was known as the Sequani. So it was found in, I believe, 1897. We found these fragments, and luckily for us, because it's a calendar, and repeats. Scholars are fairly confident that they know the full layout of the calendar. Of course, it's hard to speak to that specifically. Oftentimes, we think we absolutely know something and it turns out we don't. But in this case, because of its repetitive nature as a calendar ought to have, they're pretty confident in their reconstructions of it. One of the things about the Coligny calendar is that it is a lunisolar calendar, so it correlates the cycles of both the sun and the moon. This is different than, of course, the Gregorian calendar, which only takes solar motion, our revolution of the sun into account. The days alternate on the calendar between 30 and 29 traditionally. There's 1 month equus, which sometimes can go down to 28. But generally speaking, the months have either 30 or 29 days. They're marked matis, meaning good, lucky, auspicious, and unmatis, which is the opposite of those things. One of the parallels to that strikes me is the Attic calendar, which was used by ancient Athenians, which marked months as full or hollow. So I found that quite interesting that they had marked their months in that way, and then the Gauls had matis and unmatis.
Now, does the matis and unmatis, does that link along with fertile and infertile times of the year?
No, that actually alternates between the months. So like 1 month will be matis, the next month will be unmatis. Matis months are the months with 30 days, and then unmatis months are the ones that have 29. So another definition might also be complete and incomplete months. But that is why those months have those terms next to them.
Interesting.
Yeah, so they go back and forth.
So I'm guessing that the complete incomplete is 29 days, complete is 30.
Yes. Which again, like I said, there's a pretty striking parallel to that at calendar, which marks full and hollow. I don't remember the Greek names for those. But yeah, that was one of the things I found striking. Because there are often different takes on the calendar, and some of them I had read through, and then that was one of the things I had noticed when looking at other calendars from different Indo-European cultures.
Now you said that it's lunisolar, so it's going to take into account both the moon and the sun. Now the sun's pretty consistent on how it functions, but the moon shifts through the moon phases. Do they take that into account?
They did, and I suppose the moon is consistent as well, but but in comparison to the solar year, not quite. And so the way they accounted for this was to occasionally, because the Caligny calendar generally ran on 5-year cycles, is that they would, during 2 of those years, they would add an extra month. This allowed them to account for the disparity in cycles between the sun and the moon. And this allowed them to bring them somewhat closer together. Now, there are a few theories regarding what else they might have done with the calendar. Some have proposed Equus having 28 days on some years. That would boost its accuracy quite a bit. Another thought is that one of the years was taken out of the 5-year cycle every 4 cycles. So you would have a 19 instead of 20-year cycle. Originally, the cycle of years was 30. It later went down to 25. There are some who suspect it may have further then went down to 19. And when you do that and you occasionally drop a day off of Equus and you remove one of the intercalary months in the 5-year cycle and one of the 5-year cycles, and you eliminate one of the 5-year patterns, one of the years out of the 5-year patterns in that cycle, you basically have a Metonic calendar, which would not have been surprising for them to have known about, considering their frequent contact with the Greeks that had went on for centuries, honestly. So there's a few theories on the historical construction of the Caligny calendar and then how to use it today. That occasionally has that degree of disparity. The suppositions about whether or not they did the same thing in the past. So yes, intercalary months were added, usually in those 5-year cycles in years 1 and 3. And this allowed it to, retain a pretty high degree of, a fairly decent degree of accuracy. If the theory that there was a Metonic relation holds sway, then it would be undoubtedly quite accurate.
Now, in the last episode, I had talked a little bit about Catu Alessia, which I'm pretty sure is essentially a totally reconstructed holiday. Are there any holidays that we have that we know that the Gauls celebrated, or are they just for the most part reconstructed?
All right. Well, the first thing, Catus Alessios is definitely one that, quite strictly, comes into play currently, amongst people in the Gaulish community today. If for no other reason than there was nothing about it to suggest that battle was marked, especially because the Battle of Alessia happened in Werni territory, and the Caligny calendar comes from what was once Sequani territory, again, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, so to our knowledge, no, nothing on the calendar seems to suggest that they had marked the day. So yeah, it's something that we can, not me personally, but something that had been around in the community for a few years before I had joined as well. I believe someone named David Natos had come up with it. But yeah, Catus Alessius, so of course is a modern thing. We used the calendar app, because there's a really good Caligny calendar app, to backtrack Catus Alessius to the 17th of Agronios, which is pretty interesting because that means right around the 3rd quarter moon in the month of Agronios every year, Catus Alessius is observable in that fashion. Because in Bessus Neocollegian and B&G, all holidays are based around and revolve around the Caligny calendar. So we have no Gregorian, no holidays are based on anything in the Gregorian calendar. So it was important for us to find that date and utilize it in that fashion. Otherwise, I think on the Gregorian calendar, it's October 3rd, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think so.
But yeah, and like especially in Besisnoe Glotia, it's the 17th of Uranios, which of course would fall on different Gregorian dates. This year it fell on the 10th of October, and we had an observance then as well, which was quite an interesting ritual. So as far as other holidays go, the only one that we seem to have like a fair assumption as far as a named holiday in which people celebrated would be Trenoch Simoni, the 3 nights of Simonios, which occurs on the 17th of the month of Simonios, and presumably the 2 nights after that. So that's the only one that we have like directly named, at least on Coligny calendar. However, on calendar itself, one will find clusters that say Iwos, which is believed to mean holiday or feast, movable feast, something along those lines. And those occur at fairly regular intervals throughout the year. So, like in the dialogues of current practice, because scholars don't know what time during the lunar cycle the month started in, we just know that they started in relation to the lunar cycle. One of the ones we've been using in B&G is, of course, the first quarter starts the month. And by doing that, it allows a clear division of the month where the first quarter moon starts at the third quarter moon starts the second half of the month. Months on the Coligny calendar were divided in halves. 15 days for the first half always, and then 15 or 14 for the second half, which again is probably part of the Matis and Matis dynamic. So that allows for a clear division, and it also centers the full and new moon in the middle of each of those fortnights. And then the next thing would be, so we have these Ewos clusters. And as I said, they appear fairly regularly on the calendar. They oddly appear in different months, but that's because these holidays all have a certain, at least for modern reference sake, they all start a certain distance from solstices. And one actually does from the spring equinox. No, there's nothing for the autumnal one. But the rest of them tend to start a certain distance from one or the other solstice. The solstices themselves are not marked as holidays, but there are holidays that are fairly close to them that use lunar phases as references. Most of these Ewoi tend to last about 7 days, so about a week. And this could be either because A, they had feasts, festivals that lasted that long, or B, they were considered like a range of days in which you could hold a given festival. So we have some pretty interesting points. There are, like the 4 well-known Irish fire festivals, I guess they're sometimes called. Like those all have correlations on the Coligny calendar, but so do other holidays, so do other times. As you have a feast pretty close to the summer solstice. You have a 1-day one that's the full moon closest to the winter solstice. You have another that is the new moon closest to the vernal equinox. So we have, I think, about 9 of these either single day Ewoi or their clusters. So each of these denoted a holiday, and the names of them tend to be reconstructions. I know B&G often picks them based on the time of year in which they fall. So, like, of course, with Kentugamos, the start of winter, we have Kentusamos, the start of summer, which, of course, occurs at the beginning of the other half of the year. Buiukolinos occurs in a time roughly equal to late January to mid-February. So it'll be in that kind of time frame. There's one that's the full moon closest to the winter solstice, which we call Geomolitis, which just means the winter feast. Wasonolitis, the spring feast, which occurs the new moon closest to the vernal equinox. And yeah, these are all names that we've assigned them because they didn't, to our knowledge at least, they did not specifically name any other holidays other than Trinoch Simoni, which happens fairly close to the summer solstice. So a lot of these meanings to these holidays we've kind of had to assign on our own.
How to convert from a Gregorian to Coligny?
Let me know when you figure that out. Because that one is
legit.
You really can't. There's nothing. The best thing you can do regarding the Coligny calendar versus the Gregorian is simply to assign as like the months in the Coligny. Like we'll take like the first month, like Simonios. Simonios falls like sometime between May and June. So like it might be like mid-May to mid-June, or like early May to early June, or late May to late June.
What are the different months in the Coligny calendar?
All right, so traditionally there are 12 main months of the Coligny calendar. So this is excluding the two intercalary months, because the intercalary months are a little more controversial. We're not as sure about what they're called. So people working with the Coligny calendar kind of have to just pick a answer to that and kind of stick with it for the time being, I suppose, unless somehow we figure the answer to that out. Anyway, so you have the 12 main months. There are different opinions on when these actually occur. Some people think the calendar starts the winter. Some people say it starts the summer. I'm firmly in the latter camp on that question. And so to give a run off of the 12 months, the month of Simonios falls roughly in May to June. Dumonios, roughly June to July. Rioros, July to August. Onaguntios, August to September. Abronios, September, October. And then Kotios would be like October, November. Kiamonios, November, December. Simiwasona, December to January. Equos, January, February. Alembios, February, March. Adrenios, March to April. And then Kanlos, it'd be roughly April, May. The intercalary months, there are two schools of thought. One is that those months were named Kialos, which may mean something like here again, because I know ki usually means like here in this place. Holos is other second, so like so maybe like the that which is placed second, or that which, something like that. I'm not exactly a linguistic expert, so but that was one of the theories I had heard about that. Otherwise, there's another thought that the first month was called Kimonios, and the second one Renteranos. That's the one I tend to go with. That way, I have two different names for the specific intercalary months. Kimonios would be the one that always is always the first intercalary month, and Renteranos the second. I find that works easier, but it could go either way. Otherwise, they could both be Kialos. And Kimonios would be inserted at the beginning of the first year. So it would take, like an April, May, June area. And Renteranos, on the other hand, like October-ish, November-ish, like it's hard to say. Like it gets like wedged in there.
So something that you did kind of cover, which was a question of mine, that might as well get to it now, was the Gaullist New Year, and I know that caused quite a bit of debate among. Yeah, I remember that was a big topic of discussion for a while. Whether it starts in the winter or whether it starts in the summer.
Because the reason why that one is so important is simply because, obviously, if you're going to celebrate a new year, you got to know when the new year is. So it's totally understandable. People tend to feel strongly one way or the other about that issue. I'm certainly one of the people that would say, based on the few of the etymologies of the months that we are more comfortable in knowledge-wise, would say that it would start in the summer. This is not unlike the Attic calendar, which also starts in the summer, and which again has that distinction of months we talked about earlier with the Matis and Matis, and for the Attic calendar, full hollow. And so I thought that was quite interesting. And so that led me to believe that there are, other than a couple of these months that we are more comfortable with, assuming they're etymologies, that would lead us to say the summer. And that puts us to, Noyo Bladani, the new year. And that's another one. We don't really know if the Gauls celebrated New Year's like that, or if those would have just been worked into their to an EWOS cluster that is there, or not, it would be just like worked into those celebrations as well. So like for BNG, for example, that's what we do. We work our Noyo Bladani, our New Year's celebrations in with, Kent Samos, start of summer, since it's right there. That's because there's an EWOS cluster right at the beginning of the year. So yeah, that's where we had a pretty good celebration of that at the beginning of the year a few months ago. I quite enjoyed it. That was about 5 months ago, I believe. See, at this point, I'm thinking along the lines of the Coligny months. I'm like, yeah, it's about 5 months ago. So yeah, it was 5 months ago. It's quite a lovely celebration. But again, that's another one that, like Katasalesios, we don't know how particular they were about the new year. So that's something we kind of added in, so that one's fairly modern. Like we have like a countdown and stuff. We like to get to drinking,
which I did.
Yeah. And so even I did. I'm not really a drinker. But regardless, one of the things we do for that is we give offering to Karnanos because of his position as a liminal type that stands between two worlds. And one of the things we offered to him would be things like mead or honey. Honey, if you can't get a hold of mead, is totally fine because it's sweet, it's golden. So gentleness and prosperity for the coming year was the motivation behind that. And really that was based off of the color. Longevity, prosperity, because obviously like honey lasts a very, very long time. So yeah, longevity, prosperity, sweetness, gentleness, for the year. I think those are good wishes for a new year. And that's what we offer to Karnanos on that day, that night, I suppose. And due to the lovely weather that time of year, makes it all the better.
What else can we talk about with the Coligny calendar?
Well, one thing I suppose I could plug in the app, which is just coligny-app.com. That way people can see the app for themselves. Yeah. Pretty easy and accessible calendar. I say one of the cool things about the Coligny calendar is there was a scribal mistake in it. It's known that there's a scribal mistake. There was debate on, because there's one that's like 3 EWOS days. And then there's like another EWOS a month later that has its full 7. And obviously, like, I don't want to speak authoritatively and say, like, I'm right and, the Ancient Goals somehow got it wrong. But it's assumed to be an error because there isn't a holiday pattern in any of the other years quite like it. So what I deduced from that is that the EWOS markings that are only 3 days does fit the holiday pattern of being X amount of moon phases before or after a solstice. In this case, the holiday we've celebrated today, Kentagamos, which is, 2 first quarters before the winter solstice. So that's where there was the 3-day EWOS that was there this year. This only happens once every full cycle. And so I noticed then there was the EWOS this next month that doesn't fit that pattern. So it's either A, they had 2 this time and one holiday fits that pattern and the other just is there every new cycle, or that's the one that didn't belong and the one that wasn't finished, and that the one we're on now just wasn't finished. That's possible too, because this one fits the pattern. In fact, one of the things I would say is that if somebody's not well versed in the Coligny calendar, the majority of the holidays that are on it, in fact, I would say, all of the ones that are on it, that aren't like the newer ones, like Kata Celestia, would be a lot hard to tell. But one of the things to do with that is one notices that there are so many holidays, so many phases before or after a solstice. That's the biggest guide I can give. So if you know when the solstices are, and the vernal equinox, if you know when those are, then it's a lot easier to know when the holidays are, even if you don't know the calendar well. So, like, if I know that Kentagamos is 2 first quarter moons before the winter solstice, if I look for when the first quarter moon is before that, I'm going to be on the same holiday pattern as everybody else, even if I don't even look at a Coligny calendar or any particular version of it. So I find that very useful. First quarters, the quarter moon's pretty easy to see, so that's why I like them. There's a little less debate around, it's a little less debate to the naked eye, so I recommend those.
Well, thanks for coming on and talking about the Coligny calendar, Nellis, and we'll definitely have you on for a few other topics and and probably more holiday stuff. Anything you got to add, Brenagara?
No, not at all. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me. Appreciated being on here. Thank you for the opportunity, letting me speak.
No problem. We'll definitely have you on some more.
Hope that talk with Nellis was very informative. I just, the Caligny calendar is always something I'm always very confused with, and the various holidays. We'll have a holiday-specific episode later on down the road. Just to clarify, that recording was done back on October 24th, I believe. So that's when we were talking to him. So every time he said today, that's what he was talking about.
Does get a little confusing. We do record in clips around our own schedules.
Exactly, yeah. And I know this week has been very exhausting for both of us.
I think it's kind of been exhausting for an entire country of people.
You're not kidding. I did a Facebook Live thing earlier, and I mentioned how I goofed on both the very first word of the week and the Grove Assembly post where I used an older image. It was very embarrassing that not once, but twice, I just was unfocused and posted inaccurate stuff.
It happens, and that's okay. For those of you tuning in, we split our recording sessions up based around our regular schedules, and so that means that our episodes get recorded in clips. Just to make sure it's clearly understood, the clip that was on the Caligny calendar, that was recorded back in October on the 24th-ish. It is now November 8th, Veterans Day, and we are recording the tail end of the episode so that we can get it out on the 15th.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And usually our recording days are like Saturday or Sunday night, just because that's just the best time for our schedules to link up.
It's because I work very late on Mondays, and you are 3 hours behind me.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you're East Coast, I'm West Coast.
So I think that the Caligny calendar is definitely a confusing topic. Holidays in general, with reconstructing them, can get a little confusing with Gaulish polytheism. But I think that once we get a better idea and we've got more established holidays, it'll be a little easier to follow. But I think definitely that the Caligny calendar, trying to understand it from a, so to speak, civilian, quote unquote, perspective, is definitely a wee bit complicated.
Yeah. And Nellis himself, on a couple of occasions I've talked to him, has said that it celebrate it however you want to celebrate it.
Oh, definitely, yeah. All right. So I believe we are going to go over the Gaulish virtue of the episode.
And just a quick reminder, these virtues we're taking from the Tauta Galation, and I think there's like 8 of them or so. But once we're wrapped up with them, we'll move on to BNGs and then Cenobisus Bulgan.
And we will also later on down the road cover a little more into depth on what BNG is, what Tauta Galation is, and then what Cenobisus Bulgan is. Hopefully we'll be able to get a representative for each of them to come in and talk to us about them as well, just so that we have a kind of a broader, more clear view. But that's going to be probably next season. I think we're going to try and keep it basic this season. So I am going to butcher this word. Is it Curia?
I never really clarified with Kuno or Branos. We're just gonna go with Curia.
Sure.
It sounds fancy. It sounds fancy to say.
Sounds fancy to say because I took Spanish in high school.
So did I.
West Coast educations. All right, so what we're going to talk about is the virtue of Curia, which is loyalty, sincerity, and good faith. And what does that mean to you, Articados?
Well, first off, not to digress too much, but this actually came up when I was posting the virtues on the Tauta Facebook and whatnot. But these are inspired by the ancient Gauls. These are, we don't have any historical evidence that says that these were their virtues. With that said, though, we can look at what historical record we do have and kind of pinpoint certain areas where they did apply these kind of things. And then, of course, applying them into a modern sense. Now, with that out of the way, to me, loyalty is a big thing. And this is something I mentioned back in episode 1, is that I'm a United States Marine. So loyalty is a big deal to me. It's something that I've shown with family and different jobs that I've had. Just being loyal and having good faith in something, even when the stuff's hitting the fan a little bit and it just feels unfair and your loyalty's feeling not exactly repaid in a way. And that's something that I have learned the hard way on many times, that of putting loyalty in the wrong place. Not to get too much into my drama, but I spent 6 years at a job that clearly didn't care about me. They saw that I wasn't going to quit. So, and they're just like, okay, let's put this guy in this job that we just need someone there. We just need someone with a heartbeat and a set of hands there. And we're just going to just use him as kind of like a scapegoat and just things like that. I'm also in the process of getting out of a 10-year marriage, which shouldn't have lasted a year. And those are really personal examples of putting your loyalty and good faith in the wrong place.
I can definitely understand that. For me, I was also in the military, so for the Navy, it's honor, courage, and commitment are the core values that they instill in us at the tender young age of I shouldn't be allowed to make adult decisions at 18. But they're ones that have definitely stuck with me. And so one of the things I really like about the virtues that we're establishing in Gaulish polytheism throughout the various different groups is that they kind of give you a little bit of guidance on how to kind of help your personal behavior reflect your community, your core beliefs, your core values. And for me, loyalty is something that is also very important, but it is something that can reach an endpoint. If somebody does something that goes against my core beliefs, loyal or not, I have to be ready to stand up and say, here's where I disagree, or something along those lines. I need to be willing to stand up to that as well, which I think kind of spills over into the good faith and definitely into the sincerity. Having loyalty, blind loyalty, for me isn't going to be something that'll ever happen, because blind loyalty leads to an almost cult-like mentality. You can be loyal, but you need to be sincere. You can have good faith in people, but you need to be sincere. You need to be able to look at it and say, I see what you're saying and I understand it, but this goes against the core of who I am, and this goes against the core of what I believe. And so you need to be able to stand up to it. I think for me, that's what real loyalty is knowing when to stand up and say, this isn't okay.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with that more. Now, looking at it in a historical sense, one story that comes to mind, because I don't have a book in front of me, and we'll definitely go into Gaulish history more in depth on down the road. I know it's in our list of episodes to do, but I believe it's in the Gallic Wars. There is a set of brothers from the Aedui tribe. One was pro-Roman, the other was anti-Roman. Now, both of these men, both of them had loyalty, and they were good faith and sincerity for their people, their tribe. They just went about it in two very big extremes. Well, there's Dumnorix, who was the anti-Roman. I'm probably going to get this quote wrong, but I believe he said that he would rather be enslaved by Gauls than by Romans. While his brother, his name I cannot remember. It's like Diviacus or something along those lines. But he sought out to preserve his people by siding with Rome, seeking protection from him. And I think both of these men had the absolute best of intentions, but they just went about the total opposite directions on how to do that.
Yeah, that sounds like they definitely came at it from different ends. And I can't imagine that was particularly easy on their people or on each other. But sometimes loyalty, it's the reason why loyalty can't be blind. You have to be able to look at an entire situation and know when to say, okay, this is nonsense, or where can we compromise, or what can we do to make this better for our people. And I think right now, with our Gaulish polytheistic community being so small and so specific, that we need to be able to find that compromising ground amongst everybody to be able to build a solid community.
And like you said, we are a very small community, but there are people with very different opinions, and it has led to arguments that I've seen here and there, but for the most part, we do get along. There are people who keep Gaulish polytheism and trying to maintain the growth and success of it in mind, and setting their own personal egos aside, but that's not always the case. I think everyone's got a story about how they had a friend in the wrong, that they were doing something that they knew was wrong, but they didn't want to damage that friendship to do the right thing. But that's kind of where kind of touch on Gaul a little bit, just to have that courage to do the right thing, even though it may damage a friendship. But it's kind of hard to explain this. Sometimes to show good loyalty for your friend is to do the best thing for them, even when they don't want it.
Yeah.
If that makes
I can actually think of a lot of situations where things like that have come up in my personal life, even where it's happened to me.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of what I see with it is mental health stuff. You see it a lot in there because it'll be a thing that needs to happen, but, you know, the person that needs it to happen isn't going to do it, or is going to think that it's being done because everybody hates them or something like that. I do definitely understand what you're saying, and that is a kind of loyalty. It's oftentimes the hardest kind of loyalty.
Absolutely. Something I've always had issues with is a lot of family issues, and of course, family is a big deal for me. But I have family members who are in the wrong at times, and I had a fight with siblings not too long ago about a personal decision I was making that I felt was the best for me personally, and I knew it was going to make life for my family a little harder, but I knew it was best for me and my mental health. And I think the first person you have to be loyal to is yourself at times. I mean, you can't kind of lay yourself on the sacrificial block for everyone just to make them happy, because you're only going to be damaging yourself.
Yeah, that circles back around to what I said earlier about you have to know when to stand up and say this goes too far against my core beliefs.
Absolutely, yeah.
You do have to have some self-loyalty. Otherwise, you're just more or less, you're not having the strength necessary to be able to carry on a healthy life.
Exactly, and you're just probably not the best term, but you're essentially making yourself an indentured servant. You're serving someone else while hurting yourself.
Yep, and that is unfortunately something we see very commonly.
Yeah.
And that kind of wraps into the sincerity. You can't sincerely be there for everybody if you are not there for yourself.
Exactly. And just, you're not going to make everyone happy. And I think that's just a reality that a lot of people just don't quite grasp, or it happens in a way that they don't expect.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you're going to make decisions, you're going to do things with your life that's going to piss off someone. So you have to be able to make the decision to be loyal and sincere to yourself, or you're just going to have someone else direct your life.
And in turn of being able to do that for yourself, you can also do it for others. But you have to be able to do it for yourself first. That was a hard pill to swallow when I learned that lesson. Because I'm the type of person who will give until I have nothing left, and then just, collapse. But it was a hard learned lesson.
Oh, yeah. I mean, years at a job I didn't like and that didn't respect me, years in a marriage that was falling apart. I just couldn't give in to what was best for me. So yeah, I learned it the hard way, big time.
I think we've all done that.
Well, before we end this thing, later on this month, on the 21st, on Discord, we are having a Grove Assembly. Kamritan Kelios, or the Grove Assembly. We're going to have a couple of different speakers talk about Gala stuff, including myself. So definitely come on there. You don't have to stay on Discord, but you can definitely come in, check it out, and just and learn some stuff.
All right, so next month we are going to be covering what is Gaulish polytheism. We will have a special guest, and that will be Kuno Belanis, who is over there in charge of the Tauta Galation. And also, please do remember that we do release our episodes on the 15th of every month, and you can find us all over social media. On Facebook and Instagram, we are under Gallcast, and on Twitter, we are under Gallcast Podcast, because apparently Gallcast was already taken. So thank you very much for hanging out with us and listening to our podcast, and we will see you next time.
See you later. See you later. That's.
Thank you very much for hanging out with us and listening to our podcast, and we will see you next time.
See you later. That's. See you later. That's. See you later. See you later. I think Twitter is the what hang on, let me
Twitter should be Gallcast.
Yeah, I think you're right. Okay.
Hold on, let me double check. Damn it, now I gotta go look. some point in time, someone's going to get a hold of our like unedited shit and they're going to be like, good Lord, they're just so disorganized. Like, but I promise we're not. I promise. I got a spreadsheet. Twitter is Gallcast Podcast. All right. Do you want to do the Grove Assembly and then I'll do the rest of the closeout?
Sure.
Okay.
Well, before we end this thing, later on this month, actually, if this is coming out on the 15th, so on about 6 days, on the 21st, on Discord, if you go on there and get into Gallcast, we are having a Grove Assembly. Comraton, I can't remember the other word.
Keleos.
Comraton Keleos, or the Grove Assembly. And we're going to have a couple of different speakers talk about Gala stuff, including myself. So definitely come on there, and you don't have to stay on. You don't have to stay on Discord, but you can definitely come in, check it out, and just and learn some stuff.
All right, and for next month, we are going to be covering the. Let me see. Hold on, let me try that over again. All right, and so next month we are going to be covering what is Gaulish polytheism. We will have a special guest, and that will be Kuno Belenis, who is over there in charge of the Tauta Galation. And also, please do remember that we do release our episodes on the 15th of every month, and you can find us all over social media. On Facebook and Instagram, we are under Gallcast, and on Twitter, we are under Gallcast Podcast, because apparently Gallcast was already taken. So thank you very much for hanging out with us and listening to our podcast, and we will see you next time.
See you later.